what I was looking at, and again, it's speaking with the chair and vice chair about around concerns that's about retailers selling certain very high potency products and whether or not those should be permitted. Remember, the board is going to be able to regulate, a lot of that. So did you guys want to create some kind of ceiling and say, basically these kinds of products are off limits for retail sale? And so we were just working around and talking to some folks and looking at some options here. And so the first one being limiting cannabis flower to being, it can't be greater than 30% THC. Solid concentrate, so that's kind of like the wax and shatter, and I'll leave it up to John to explain what those are. With greater than 60% THC. For those that are sold prepackaged for use with battery-powered devices, so those are like the oil vapes that are used. And then cannabis products that contain delta-9 THC and nicotine in combination. And so that's something that's already, that price sounds a little familiar, just the wording's a little different. That's already in the rules that you already have there. But I just, again, kind of the idea of that if you're going to start putting things in different places, let's kind of aggregate them so it's a little easier to find. Bob?
Madam Chair, I direct this to Michelle, but I know somebody else might end up answering it. If we go with these limitations, how much of the secondary market are we enlivening and restricting markets that we're supposedly taxing and regulating from accessing and providing a safe product for people?
I think that's certainly the policy issue that you have to grapple with, is by saying you're not going to, if again, one of the stated goals of S54 is to move as much of the illegal market into the regulated market, and that people may not like that these products exist, but from a policy perspective, would you rather have them, if they're going to be out there, be in the regulated market, or do you say we just don't approve of these products at all, and therefore we are going to prohibit them in the regulated market, because it may be that they flourish if they're not regulated. But I want to mention just something as part of this that's not in here, and that I might add as a recommended tweak, is that we do have a law on the books now that prohibits manufacture of these types of products by certain mechanisms by anyone who's not a licensed dispensary. So people who are using butane now to make some of these types of products are in violation of the law. I mean, they'd be, so that is a crime right now. You might want to just take another look at that existing law and make sure that, that was, I think we might have done that when we did decrim, so maybe in 2013 or so, and I don't know if it needs to be tweaked around the types of production that's used and things like that, but that might be something you want to look at in combination with this.
So I don't know anything about 4 of the items on the list, but from hanging out at a lot of Grateful Dead concerts, I wonder if number 1 is, a preferred delivery mechanism for people, and whether 30% represents a nice Jack Daniels or whether that's green alcohol if you both afford it. And need a point of reference.
Now is the time where we would like to invite Shayne to join us. Thank you so much for coming to be with us again today.
Thank you for having me.
I know.
Shayne Lynn, Champlain Valley Dispensary, Executive Director. I guess we'll jump right in on your 30% question. I think that's probably at the upper reaches of flower potency. There are definitely some people that have lab testing that comes in at probably 26, 27%. I have yet to see anything over 30%. And that would literally, technically that would literally mean the plant is 30% THC. So getting a plant that would potentially be 40% THC, at that point you start to wonder, how does it stand? How does it support itself?
I have no idea what that means.
the sense of
problem myself.
Yes, the plant has to have some cellulose structure to it
Yes.
in order to be able to hold form. Otherwise, it would be a puddle of.
THC.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, sort of. In the old days of Mexican weed as opposed to Thai stick, people describe a difference that I don't know anything about. But do you have reference points on what the scale of
Cannabis has definitely gotten stronger since the 70s, without a doubt. And so breeders have spent a lot of time breeding their products to have more potency. And back to some of the upper limits that we see, and pick up a newspaper or go online, you can see products that have 28%.
So that's probably the limit in the 70s also.
I'd say the limits of the 70s were probably low digits, probably 5%, 6%, 7% THC. So since the 70s to now, they've made the plant more potent by breeding two potent plants together to make it more potent.
I'm sold.
Lauren?
What is delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol?
That is, so there's, the plant actually grows THCA. That's the compound on the plant is THCA, not THC. To get that that acid off of the plant, or off of the compound basically, that's when you heat the plant, if you want to think of lighting a joint. That heat removes the A, and then you have THC, and THC is the psychoactive component. So you could eat raw flower, cannabis flower, and you won't get high because it's THCA on the plant. And you need to get rid of that acid. And so basically, like with edibles, if you want to create an edible that has active THC in it, you had to have taken the dried flower or the oil and heated that oil up to a certain temperature to have the acid come off of that compound. And then that oil is active, that's active THC. And then you would put that active THC into an edible. And that edible then, if you ingested it, will...
Baking the brownie do it?
Potentially, but if you really want to ensure that all the oil is activated, you would activate the oil before you put it into the edible. You could do it the other way, but then you're going to get mixed results.
So what's the delta-9 part?
Delta-9 is just signifying that that has gone through that process, that I call it decarb process, decarboxylation. That basically represents that it's gone through that process. And that's how you want to test the flower as well, is after it's been decarbed. So then you know how much THC is in the flower.
Thank you.
Michelle?
Can I ask you, so on 1 and 2, do I have the terminology right? So I mean, I use the delta-9 for the products because I know that about the products, but for 2, would I just, is that right to say 60% THC?
So you're getting into that question of, hey, if they're making the product potentially, the concentrate would
Right.
activate it or deactivate it.
Right.
And so you maybe could potentially add the delta-9 aspect to that, or both, to be sure. Solid concentrates, just, there's, over the past 5 years, there's been a lot of different concentrates that have been created in the marketplace. And some of those are shatter, it's dabbing, people use rigs to dab. It's, think of it I hate to compare it to alcohol, but it is, think about it as a liquor, basically. It's it's a higher proof, and it's got lots more THC in it, and it's very powerful. And the people that usually do use that product, though, do have a high tolerance, just like someone that's used to maybe potentially having a shot or two of tequila. Someone that's not taking shots of tequila will really feel the effect. Same for people that use concentrates. If they use concentrates a lot, their tolerance is higher, and so they are looking to use a product that is has more proof to it, basically more THC in it. So.
John?
So 2 would basically prohibit wax and shatter, which are used for dabbing, right, Shayne?
Yes, if that's your policy goal, that would do that. And that 60% number is, is what you're saying, hey, you have to be under that 60%. If you tested it and it came out at 65% THC, that under this rule, that wouldn't be allowed. And currently, products are on the market that are, 95% pure THC.
So just for folks to remember, the number 3 that's up there is in recognition that it is increasingly the market has basically, your vaping devices, your e-cigarettes available for another consumption method. And so this is just saying that the oil is prohibited except for oil that comes sold in prepackaged for use in that e-cig device. Because the oil is going to have a greater concentration than 60%, which we've prohibited above, but it also comes in a cartridge that's
Cartridges, pens, they're really a mainstay in the cannabis industry at this point for their consistency of dosing. It's a very reliable way for someone to either have a small portion. Usually what occurs is someone will try it, they'll wait a couple minutes to see the effect, and then if they would like more, they'll have another puff on the cartridge. And so at least on the medical side, that's a very good way to titrate your medication. And you're not going to be surprised by the dosing, potentially, that the onset of eating an edible, if people aren't familiar, that onset can be potentially challenging for them, versus with a pen, you can consistently monitor your dose, basically, your dosage.
questions, committee?
Is it too late to suggest we add a chemical engineer to the advisory board?
There was somebody on there with lab, what is it? John?
Lab testing.
Lab,
Yeah,
lab
lab-
science or
laboratory
toxicology,
science.
so I think we got
Yeah.
that covered.
Yes.
So just people understand this. I mean, what we're trying to do is limit access to high potency products here. And especially number 2, I think, is the most important, because that wax and shatter are, as Shayne just said, at 95% THC. And, if you've never used those products before, you'd get in a lot of trouble using those. And so that's one of the reasons that we're trying to do here is prevent people from getting into trouble with certain highly concentrated products.
Bob?
So I'll go back to the question I don't think heard the answer to. One point, very valid on whatever that was he was talking about. Wax and shatter.
He wasn't
Sounds
listening.
like going in for hair removal.
Hair color removal.
Yeah. So the original question was, how do you market the legitimate, everyday people coming into the Vermont market? Are we limiting with this? And it sounds like not a lot. The hardcore.
I'd say that more experienced users of cannabis products are probably attracted to the concentrates versus the person that maybe uses cannabis once a week, twice a week. Concentrates probably are not on their top priority list of things to try.
These things realized by more complicated process than your CO2 extraction.
Well, it's back to Michelle mentioned butane, so you can make shatter with butane. You can also make it with CO2. You can also make it with other methods.
I was just wondering how accessible it is to the Saturday afternoon down in the basement production.
That's possible.
Marcia?
Are there any medical marijuana patients who would use this
Yeah.
product?
We do offer these products on the medical side. not a full range of them. But
And this does not affect them.
no. And so back to that tolerance level for people, that's around the medical side, and then pain relief, nausea. If the person has a high tolerance to the THC, sometimes these concentrates do work for them.
Or want pain.
Yeah.
This is, if this is okay, just to put this up there, because while Shayne's here, I think that's one of the questions I would have, is whether or not, so, no, I guess we adopted that more recently. But whether or not that kind of covers the unlicensed activity of making that, and or whether or not that needs to be tweaked at all, or, so I guess I'm wondering from Shayne, I don't know if you have any comments about like, are there other methods that people use to make those products that isn't covered by that section?
I think we're getting into probably definitions of, chemical extraction and back to the chemist having it, so you have to explore what that is necessarily. And as there, I just, there's hash making out there. Hash making is very simple process. Obviously, hash has been made. I'm sure we've all heard about hash, and it's been around for thousands of years. And you can basically make hash with ice water. And all you really need is cannabis material. Put that into an ice bath, basically. The cannabinoids on the leaf freeze. They freeze, and then you agitate that. You could literally use a washing machine. And you agitate that, and then you strain it through lots of different filters and microns, filters. At the end of that, you've removed all the plant material, and what you're left with are basically the THC. And so you can, back to how pure it gets, though, is the question, and back to that 60%. So if you had really great filters and you kept on filtering it, it's going to be very, very, very pure. But if you don't do that, you could have it under 60%. So you could offer hash still, and it will just come under 60%. So there's just different levels of it at this point. But someone could do that in their in their garage, and it's not very complicated.
JP.
Can you tell us what shatter is again?
It's basically very pure form of THC, and it gets, think about honey, and then think about like honey being left out and it getting hard. And it's, if you hit it on the desk, it would shatter.
Oh,
And that's why they call it shatter. And it's very pure though. And depending on what plant you've used, it'll have different effects because of the plant that you used and process for drying it. Over the years, it's turned into any other craft out there that, making a beer or what, people are very proud of their products that they make. And so this falls into one of those categories that people spend time making.
and then you just eat pieces of it?
You don't eat it. It's
What do you do?
it's called dab rig, and you basically have a titanium nail, and you heat a titanium nail. You basically have a piece of metal, and you heat that metal
I thought
up.
you said, okay.
Yeah, you heat that metal up to a certain temperature, and then you put a piece of that shatter on that, and then you inhale the vapors from that.
Oh, wow. Sounds a lot like
It's a concentrate. So, and back to the diverse world out there, and certain people like that over dried flower.
So any other questions on the prohibited products language? I think the only change that we're thinking might be an improvement is to also add Delta 9 THC to number 2 so that it's clear on solid concentrate, which might also be decarboxylated or whatever the term was that you used.
But I guess I can talk offline because I'm wondering about is what's there wrong, or should it be, because they're not interchangeable terms.
It's probably expanding it a little just to cover your bases if that's the intent of, ensuring, I guess, yeah, back to, I'd have to just confirm on the activated aspect of it. Because it maybe the activation is occurring at the time that they're heating it up versus does
Right.
it get activated in the process of making it?
Right.
We're probably gonna find out there's both.
Right.
I don't know.
Well, I can work offline and try
Okay.
to get however it needs to be into the next draft.
Thank you. Hal?
So, if I understand it correctly, it's been said that 80% of sales go to about 20% of the customers,
I've seen that number.
who tend to be the hardcore users. So how will number 2, putting a limit, have an impact on that group, you think?
It's a good question. I'm not sure, because I think some of those 20% users really love their flower. And back to, we see it on the medical side. Certain people just have an affinity for flower. That's how they want to consume their cannabis. And so, and it's the same for hash people, and and maybe, again, I hate to use liquor as a comparison, but just back to beer and wine. Some people like wine, some people like beer. When it comes to cannabis products, people are drawn to certain things and they have their preferences. And so I'm not sure how many people in that 20% are necessarily concentrate users. I'm sure there's some data out there on the concentrate users, but it is a smaller percentage of our market, I know. And it's not something that we, it's kind of like once a week we do a production of it. It's not like every week we're making it, or every day. It's like once a week, once a month, so it's definitely a smaller niche. It's a niche market. That would be a good way to put it. So.
Any other questions, committee? Great. So Shayne, there was one other issue that I thought you might be able to give us some testimony on, and that's committee. You'll remember from the recommendation from the Commerce Committee downstairs, there was language on disclosure of financial information to the board. And standard with regulatory disclosure is usually confidentiality of that information, so that a public records request wouldn't necessarily be able to expose all of the details of a company's methods and finances and all of that. So I want to just open up the conversation to this question. The yellow highlighted language is what was recommended from the committee downstairs.
And that's in the rules concerning the application. Let me find then you also have some rules around confidentiality, and it does cover trade secrets and security and transportation issues as they relate to applications and to licensees. But I think in terms of the financials, I think that's going to be more whether it fits under existing public records law, under 317, and like under business records. And then I think you get more to like a weighing test.
So Shayne, could you share with us your thoughts on this?
Currently on the medical side, we the information, we renew our application each year, and so we put in certain information in there, the general ledger information potentially salary information of employees. So there's a lot of concerns for us around that information. I would assume it's going to be similar on this side, on the tax regulated side, that if you're submitting your information to the Cannabis Control Board and they ask for something and it's in regards to finances, and I understand the transparency in knowing, hey, who's providing the money, but feel that potentially people would be hesitant to participate if they know that their name is going to be open to a public records check potentially. But yet, allowing the Cannabis Control Board to have access to that, but it not being a public record, I would have concerns if it was that. It's difficult to already find people to invest in the cannabis space for obvious reasons, and so I think back to ensuring that, hey, yeah, the board has control or has oversight and transparency to it, but potentially that it's not available for public requests.
So, just to explain to you sort of the investing world, typically if you're having somebody who's making private investments in a company, that information is not disclosed to a regulator or to members of the public. Now, once a company, starts trying to secure investing from members of the public through a securities offering, that information does become publicly available to regulators and to investors. So that's just sort of the securities world in a nutshell, just so people understand it. But typically, if it's private investment, it's the only people that get disclosure to that are the investors themselves and the company. But just so you understand, I'm not trying to sway people one way or the other. Just
Have you got a little experience in that?
a little.
Marcia, you might be able to help on this. Liquor licenses, if they're a corporation or sole proprietor, the principals get listed on the application as public information.
I believe
At least
so.
who the officers and the board of directors
Right,
are,
right.
that's all public. Would this be any different under this?
Well, I'm not sure. that this
It
is-
doesn't, I don't know that the financial stake of each one is
Right.
listed, but it is certainly on their license and on the DLC website.
Right, and it's registered with the Secretary of State's office.
Yes,
So-
and then that's the case of
That's the
the
case.
medical, yeah,
Okay, same
it's
thing.
it's registered, those
Yeah.
names or you can access those names.
Okay.
But potentially if they gave money and here's the contract that they provided money under, that's not
No, okay.
for public consumption. And I think if it was, people would, again, it's private information for people.
So I guess the question is there some kind of exemption from public records? That piece on the financial relationships of each of the investors.
In this language?
Well, this
This
language or
yeah,
existing.
This language, no.
Right.
We have, but in your, but also in here, you have confidentiality language, which I'll gotta figure out where it is, but under, it's more of a question of how might it fit in Tucker County? How I do that, whether it might fit in under 1 VSA 317, and I realized that I took the pocket part yesterday and I left it in the office, so I might go get it, but,
Violation of protocol to take.
sorry, I know, I'm so sorry.
And back to the board having access to it potentially versus though, hey, the public,
Right.
are two things.
Right.
And then even back to the privacy though, operations, that'd even be at the very top of the list of just, business plans, your general ledger, back to being a private business, would like to have that information private, just like any other business out there.
I understand.
So,
Tucker, thank you for being with us.
It's my pleasure.
Not sure how to.
It's genuine.
Yes. I
get
believe
hot
both
and
of us. Two truths and a lie, is that what we're saying here? What's he gonna say next? So Tucker, can you, I don't even know how to articulate a question for Tucker on this. How would you recommend we?
So the question we're tackling, and I think it's mostly on Roman numeral 2 up there, is whether that could be exempt from public disclosure under an exemption.
Under the existing, first, good afternoon, Tucker Anderson, Office of Legislative Counsel. Under the existing Public Records Act exemptions, there are protections for business documents, mostly related to trade secrets. However, the trick with those exemptions in 1 VSA section 317 sub C is that each of them requires the balancing of the public interest in accessing those records against the interest in keeping them private.